Starting up section 2 on lecture 6. All right, we're shifting gears here. We're going to look at Dutch art. And first, let's get acquainted with the neighborhood. The geography. First off, the Netherlands are way up there in Northern Europe, right there. And the official title of this area during the 17th century is the United Provinces of the Netherlands. And they're right above Flanders, which we looked at when we were looking at Flemish art and Peter Paul Rubens. And the colored areas on this map are the United Provinces of the Netherlands, and the most prominent of these provinces is called Holland. So frequently we refer to the entire Netherlands by the main province, Holland. What else? Religion, important point. The Protestant Reformation, starting in 1517, really caught on up there in the Netherlands. And all of these countries down here that we've been looking at so far have been Catholic. Well, now we're with a different persuasion up there in the Netherlands. They are decidedly Protestant, Calvinist in particular, and that is going to have such a profound influence on the type of art that they produced, as we will see. Society. Society is different as well. There is a royal house in the Netherlands, but it's relatively unimportant in society. In contrast, the economy and the government are ruled by the wealthy middle class. So aristocracy, nobility, and royalty are very much all but absent up there in the Netherlands. Economy, touched on it already. Yeah, this is a map of Amsterdam, which is in the province of Holland. And see all those things floating in the water down there? Those are ships. The Dutch were proud of their ships. They did portraits of their ships. And the Dutch did portraits of naval victories that they won. During the 17th century, the Dutch had one of the largest navies in the world, and they were a dominant naval power in Europe. They also had a powerful maritime fleet, that is, a fleet of merchant ships. I mean, look at this map here. Up there, the Netherlands, and they established trading routes all around the globe. The light green areas, that's the Dutch East India Company. The dark green, the Dutch West India Company. And those orange squares are smaller Dutch trading ports. And they settled South Africa. Over here in America, look what they established. It was called New Amsterdam. And when the English took New Amsterdam from the Dutch, they renamed it New York. And so it's the Dutch being the first Europeans to colonize Manhattan, New York City. Because of this trade network and the wealth that it brought in, the 17th century became the Dutch Golden Age. There in Amsterdam, we had the first stock exchange established, and the Netherlands became the economic capital of Europe. So much money came in during the 17th century. You could go to the markets of the Netherlands and buy anything that you wanted that was being imported from all corners of the earth. Tobacco, ivory, porcelain, silk, just anything you would want. So you had the riches of the world in the lap of these Calvinists. And that presented the Dutch dilemma. You had the religion, you got all this temptation as well. And they really had to balance these two loves in their life. Next up, politics. Put the Netherlands on the map. Now, all that prosperity of the Dutch brought them also a lot of enemies. And at times it seemed like the Dutch were against the world. At one time or another during the 17th century, they were at war with England, France, and Spain. And of course, the papacy there in Italy had hostilities towards them continuously because one was Catholic, the other was Protestant. But the Dutch were able to stave off all of this potential disaster because of the very strong navy and the wealth that the maritime fleet brought in that in turn could buy mercenary forces to fight enemies on land. So both at sea and land, the Dutch were relatively safe, even though they had so many enemies. Finally, Dutch art. If we go back 200 years, remember that? And look at 15th century Flemish painting, there were a few things I wanted you to remember, and I wanted you to remember them because we're going to apply them now in the 17th century. So this is characterizing 15th century Flemish painting. Domestic interiors, they specialized in. Visual texture, meticulous detail, sharp realism, and no classical influence. And if we look at Robert Campan's Annunciation, you can see all of those in the mix. And that's a religious scene. But you can also see that formula in their secular scenes of domestic interiors. And again, the meticulous detail and fascination for visual textures. So rather than having the Italian Renaissance as a 15th century memory, the Dutch in the 17th century are really drawing on this sort of visual culture. There's another aspect that I introduced, and that was the concept of disguised symbolism. Remember in this Annunciation scene by Campan, there's a lot of symbolic imagery in there, but the participants in the story are ignorant of it. To them, the symbols just seem like normal accessories in a domestic interior. But the enlightened viewer looks at the painting objectively and interprets the various hidden messages in those symbols. So it's disguised from the actors in the play, in the painting, but it's symbolic for the viewer interpreting the image, disguised symbolism. And again, the meticulous detail and fascination for visual textures. So rather than having the Italian Renaissance as a 15th century memory, the Dutch in the 17th century are really drawing on this sort of visual culture. There's another aspect that I introduced, and that was the concept of disguised symbolism. Remember in this Annunciation scene by Campan, there's a lot of symbolic imagery in there, but the participants in the story are ignorant of it. To them, the symbols just seem like normal accessories in a domestic interior. But the enlightened viewer looks at the painting objectively and interprets the various hidden messages in those symbols. So it's disguised from the actors in the play, in the painting, but it's symbolic for the viewer interpreting the image, disguised symbolism. Artistic styles. As you know, there are four main stylistic currents during the 17th century, but because society and religion are so different there in the Netherlands, we have a far different mix in the artistic styles, as well as artistic iconography. First off, Baroque classicism. Look, the Netherlands are so far away from Italy, the birthplace of the Renaissance and the reviver of the classical tradition. Not only is there like mileage between the two, there's a lot of cultural barriers between the two. The upshot of that is this. There never was a real strong classical tradition implanted in Dutch culture. So if we go to those four styles, Baroque classicism plays relatively no role whatsoever in the 17th century Dutch art. Well, how about the High Baroque style? We saw before that the High Baroque was really patronized by royalty and aristocracy because it so beautifully shouted the big lie, bolstering their social status. But we don't have royalty or aristocracy to speak of in the Netherlands during the 17th century. Similarly, the High Baroque style was used by the church as a powerful weapon against the Protestant Reformation. But we don't have Catholic art counter-Reformation there in the Netherlands because it's Protestant. And if you look at a Roman church, how decked out it is in this extravagant High Baroque art, and compare it then to a church interior in the Netherlands. There's no art to look at in a Dutch church because they have rejected Catholicism and Catholic saints and the depiction of all of those Catholic saints. Hey, so here's an important point. In Dutch Baroque art, there's relatively little religious art because there wasn't the church, the Catholic Church, churning out that subject. And if we look at our list of four, we can see that there is basically no High Baroque art as well because it lacks the church patronage and the aristocracy and royalty that favored that style. Caravaggioism, yeah, Caravaggioism existed in the Netherlands. As I said, Caravaggio's influence spread throughout all of Western Europe, and we have these Caravaggesque painters there in the Dutch Baroque. However, the predominant style, and here's the quiz answer, the predominant style during the Dutch Baroque 17th century art is the plain, unqualified Baroque style that we looked at last time with Velázquez. We'll see it here again, but now the Dutch version. All right, that's part 2 of lecture 6.